Get out and walk, old man. That's what my son-in-law said to me on a black mountain road in the middle of a thunderstorm, right after he pulled his SUV over, walked around to my door, dragged me out into the pouring rain, and threw my crutches into the mud-filled ditch on the side of the road. I'm 72 years old. I'd had my knee replaced 3 weeks before that night. I couldn't walk 10 feet without those crutches, and he knew it. He'd watched me struggle around the house on them for 3 weeks, and he grabbed them and hurled them into a ditch full of cold, running water. Then he turned to me, rain streaming down both our faces, and sneered, "Get out and walk." From inside the car, from the passenger seat, I heard my own daughter laugh. Not a nervous laugh, not a "this has gone too far" laugh. She laughed the way a person laughs at something they genuinely find funny. Then she leaned toward the open door, my little girl, the baby I held in my arms in the hospital 38 years earlier, and said, "Bye, Dad. Go meet a bear. You're an embarrassment to us." She was still smiling when her husband slammed my door shut. The two of them drove off and left me standing there in the dark, in the rain, on the side of a mountain, 3 weeks out of surgery, my crutches washing away down a ditch. Sit with that for a second, because I've had to sit with it every day since. But here's what the two of them didn't know as they drove off laughing into the storm. When they finally pulled back into that driveway a couple of hours later, I was already inside. Dry. Sitting in my own chair, in my own living room, lights on, waiting. And when they walked through that door and saw me sitting there, the color drained out of both their faces. I smiled and said, "I have a surprise for you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. None of this means a thing unless I tell it in order, so you understand exactly how a 72-year-old man on crutches got himself off that mountain and beat them home, who came around that bend in the storm to stop for him, and what that surprise actually turned out to be. I promise you, it isn't what they feared, and it isn't what you're expecting either. My name is Walton Brennan. Most people call me Walt. I'm 72. When I was 18 and about as green as any 18-year-old boy ever is, I joined the Army. I want to be clear about this right away, because it matters later. I was not a hero, not special forces, not some elite operator, no chest full of medals. I was an ordinary soldier who did his job and came home in one piece, which is more than some of the men beside me got to do. After the service, I went to work like everybody does. I spent close to 40 years inspecting bridges and roadways for the state, out in every kind of weather, climbing steel and concrete, wearing my knees down to nothing, which is exactly how I ended up needing one replaced at 72. Along the way, I married a wonderful woman named Eleanor, the finest person I ever knew, and the two of us had one daughter. I lived an ordinary, unremarkable life, and I was deeply proud of it. But my years in the Army gave me one thing that mattered more than I could have ever known at the time. They gave me a man named Samuel Voss. Hold on to that name. Let me tell you about my daughter first, because this story is really about her, and about how she broke my heart in a way I didn't know a heart could break at 72. Her name is Dana, born in 1988, when I was 34. Eleanor and I had waited a long time for her, and when she finally came, she became our whole world. I coached her softball teams. I taught her to drive on the back roads outside town, white-knuckling the door handle. I walked her down the aisle in a suit I bought special and paid for a wedding I couldn't really afford because I wanted her to have the day she'd dreamed of. I was there for every day of that girl's life. Nobody can tell me otherwise. But somewhere along the way, Dana changed. I've spent a lot of sleepless nights trying to pinpoint when and how, and I still don't fully know. Some of it, I think, was simply who she became as a woman. She got hungry for a certain kind of life, a certain status, the right address, the right people around her. Eleanor used to say it to me quietly in the kitchen at night. That girl measures everything by what it costs, Walt. And I'd tell her it was a phase, that Dana had a good heart underneath. I want to tell you honestly, it was not a phase. I was wrong. Then Dana married Craig Pelletier, my son-in-law. I disliked the man from about the third time we met, and I kept my mouth shut for years because a father who badmouths his daughter's husband is a father who loses his daughter. Craig was all surface, a firm handshake and a watch he probably couldn't afford, and nothing underneath but pure wanting. He wanted the lifestyle, and he wanted it now, without doing the slow work of earning it. Whenever he looked at me, I could practically see him doing arithmetic behind his eyes, looking at a lonely widower with a paid-off house and a decent retirement account, quietly running the numbers. What I didn't understand for far too long was that Craig and Dana were in real financial trouble. They lived enormously beyond their means, the way people do when they care more about looking rich than being rich. About 2 years ago, Eleanor passed. Cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to the day I buried her, after more than 38 years of marriage. I was destroyed, grieving with my whole body, suddenly alone in a house full of her fingerprints. Right into that open wound, Donna and Craig came to me with a plan that sounded exactly like love. I shouldn't be alone in that big house, they said. I should let them move in, or better yet, let them help manage my affairs, put a few accounts in both our names for convenience. Let Craig handle the finances, since it was all getting to be a lot for one old man. I was so lonely, and she was my own flesh and blood, and God help me, I wanted so badly to believe it was love. So I let them in. Not all the way. Some old instinct in my gut stopped me from ever signing everything over. But I let them into my house, my life and part of my money. It was never love. I understand that fully now, though it nearly cost me my life to learn it. It was a cold, calculated takeover wearing the warm smile of a devoted daughter. The moment they were in, the contempt began. Small at first, comments about how much I ate, how slow I'd gotten, how I didn't understand modern things anymore. Then bigger. They talked about me like I wasn't in the room. Craig started making decisions about my house and money without asking. And Dana started looking at me with an expression I'd never once seen on her face. Embarrassment. Like I was something she had to constantly explain away. Then I needed my knee replaced. The surgery went fine, but recovery at 72 is slow and grinding. For weeks I was on crutches, needing help with ordinary things, the completely normal help anyone needs after major surgery. That was the final straw for both of them. I wasn't just an embarrassment anymore. I was work. A burden requiring real daily effort, and they had already quietly decided what to do about their burden. They were going to put me away. I want to be fair. There's nothing wrong with a good care facility for people who genuinely need that level of care. But that wasn't this. I didn't need a nursing home. I needed a few weeks of help while my knee healed, after which I'd be walking fine and living independently, exactly as before. What this actually was, underneath the pretty words, was Craig and Dana coldly deciding to warehouse me somewhere far away and cheap so they could take my house and my money without the inconvenience of me still being alive in it. They'd already found a place clear on the other side of the mountains, hours from everyone I knew, and they hadn't asked me. They'd simply informed me. When I refused, when I said no, this is my home, Craig smiled that smooth smile and said, "It's already decided, Walt." That's how I ended up in the back seat of Craig's SUV on a stormy night, being driven against my will over an isolated mountain road toward a facility I'd never agreed to. I was angry, frightened, and heartbroken all at once, and somewhere on that dark road, I said so out loud. I told them I wasn't going. I told them to turn around. Then I told Dana that her mother would be ashamed of what she'd become. That's what set Craig off. He swerved onto the gravel shoulder in the driving rain. For 1 second, I thought he might just yell or turn around. Instead, he threw his door open, came around to my side, wrenched it open, and physically hauled me out into the rain. I'm 72, 3 weeks out of major surgery. He's 43 and strong as an ox. There was nothing I could do. He shoved me against the wet side of the car, reached back in, grabbed my crutches, and hurled them into the ditch. Then, with rain pouring down both our faces, he said, "Get out and walk, old man." My daughter laughed and told me to go meet a bear and called me an embarrassment. Then they climbed back into the warm, dry car and drove away. I watched their taillights disappear around the curve, and then I was completely alone in the dark. What hit me first wasn't the fear, though that came soon enough. It was the sound of my daughter's laugh. Not the real possibility that I might die out there. That horror came a minute later. But that my little girl, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, had laughed at me and found it funny. That's a very specific and very deep kind of wound, and I hope none of you ever have to feel it. Then the fear came, rightfully, because I was on an isolated mountain road in a thunderstorm, 72 years old, 3 weeks post-surgery, with no way to walk. My crutches were in a ditch, being carried off by fast-moving water. I lowered myself down, in agony on my new knee, and tried to reach them, but couldn't. I watched the current pull them out of reach and into the dark. I understood, with total clarity, that I was in very real trouble. A man in my condition doesn't simply walk out of a situation like that. He might not last the night. So I dragged myself back onto the road and started hauling my body forward, inch by inch, hoping desperately that some car, any car, might come along. On a road like that, at that hour, in a storm like that, it was the thinnest kind of hope. But somebody came. I saw headlights first, easing slowly around the curve, an old pickup truck picking its way down the wet mountain road. I hauled myself up as visible as I could manage and waved both arms overhead, this soaked, shaking old man in the middle of the road, praying they'd stop instead of driving past. The truck slowed and stopped. A man climbed out, older, maybe pushing 80, but solid, moving with a steadiness some men never lose. He came toward me through the rain, calling out, "Easy now, I've got you. What are you doing out here, friend?" Then he got close enough to see my face in his headlights, and he stopped dead and said, "Brennan." Because I knew that voice even after nearly 50 years, even soaked and half frozen and terrified. It was Samuel Voss. Let me tell you who Samuel Voss is. When I was a 19-year-old private, scared and far from home, Samuel Voss was my commanding officer. A young officer himself, not much older than the rest of us, but the kind who genuinely looked after his men. He knew every name, every hometown, made it his business to make sure every one of his people was taken care of. There's a phrase in the military. Different branches say it differently, But it comes down to this. You don't leave your people behind. Not ever. Samuel Voss taught me what that actually meant. Not as a slogan, but as a way of moving through the world. I served under him for a couple of years, half a century ago. Then life carried us in different directions, and I hadn't seen him in decades. It turned out he'd retired up into these very mountains years back, had a little place tucked in the hills, and that road, that dark, isolated road where my own son-in-law had thrown me out to die, was simply the road home for him. He was driving back from town that very night, on a stretch he knew like the back of his hand, and what he found on it was one of his own soldiers, 50 years later, freezing in the mud. I nearly came apart when I realized who it was. Samuel, 79 years old, not a big man anymore, got down into that mud with me, got his shoulder under my arm, and half carried me to his truck. He cranked the heater, wrapped an old wool blanket around my shoulders, and kept saying, low and steady, "I've got you, Brennan. You're all right." Exactly as if 50 years hadn't passed, as if he were still the young officer responsible for getting every one of his men home safe. Shaking in that warm cab, I told him everything. My daughter, her husband, the facility they were forcing me into, the crutches in the ditch, the laugh. I watched his face change from concern into something harder, quieter, more dangerous. When I finished, he sat silent a long moment, staring through the rain-streaked windshield. Then he said, "Where do you live, Walt? Not the place they're dumping you. Your actual home. I'm taking you there right now." That's exactly how a 72-year-old man on crutches beat his daughter and son-in-law home. Samuel drove me straight there without stopping. Craig and Donna, meanwhile, didn't go straight home. I'd learn later they'd stopped at a restaurant to celebrate. A nice dinner, finally rid of the burden of me, while I was supposedly dying in the freezing rain. So while they looked over their menus, Samuel was helping me up the walk, getting me settled into my own chair. By the time their headlights swung into the driveway 2 hours later, I was dry, warm, and sitting there waiting, lights on. But I hadn't just been sitting there rehearsing a speech. Here's where the surprise actually came from. The first thing I did once Samuel got me settled was pick up the phone and call the sheriff. Because Craig, in all his sneering contempt, never once considered that what he'd done was a crime. Abandoning a disabled man 3 weeks out of major surgery on an isolated mountain road in a thunderstorm with no way to walk isn't a family disagreement. That's reckless endangerment, and in plenty of places, it has an even more specific name, because there are laws protecting vulnerable adults from exactly this. What he did could easily have killed me, and I had a witness. Samuel Voss, who'd found me in the exact spot they'd left me. I called the sheriff's department and reported the whole thing. A deputy was already on the way. The second thing I did was call my lawyer and leave a message that I needed to see him first thing in the morning, to rewrite my will completely and unwind every financial arrangement Craig and Dana had wormed their way into. I'd been a grieving old fool who let them get partway into my money, but only partway, and I was about to close that door for good. The third thing I did was sit in my chair, with Samuel sitting across from me, because that old man flatly refused to leave my side. Said he wasn't going anywhere until this was settled. That same never leave anybody behind steel 50 years later. After a while I heard the SUV pull up. Their voices, light and easy, laughing about something as they came up the walk, still celebrating. The door swung open. Craig walked in first, saw me sitting there, and the color drained out of his face like water running out of a sink. Dinah came in behind him, saw me too, and made a small, sharp gasp, dropping her purse on the floor. They'd left me for dead 2 hours earlier. Now here I was, dry, composed, with a silent old stranger sitting beside me. It must have looked impossible. I smiled at them both and said, "I have a surprise for you." Craig started talking fast, words tumbling out. "Walt, oh my God, we came back for you. We felt terrible. We turned right around. We were coming to get you." The lies poured out of him. I let him run all the way down, then said quietly, "Save it, Craig. There's a sheriff's deputy on the way to this house right now. This is Samuel Voss. He found me in the ditch where you left me. About a minute, I'd guess, before I'd have been in very serious trouble. He's going to tell that deputy exactly what he found, and I'm going to tell them exactly what you did. You left a disabled man to die on a mountain, Craig. That's a crime, and you're not talking your way out of this one." I watched it land on him, the understanding that this wasn't some family squabble he could smooth over with charm. Dana started to cry, and for 1 weak second, the father in me wanted to comfort her, because that reflex never fully dies. But I remembered the laugh. I looked at my daughter and said the hardest thing I've said in 72 years. "You laughed, Dana. I was standing in the freezing rain, and you laughed and told me to go die." I've replayed that sound 100 times in the last 2 hours. I don't know who you've become, but I can't pretend anymore that you're still the little girl I raised. The deputy arrived a few minutes later. Craig was arrested that night. What he'd done with a witness and a victim both giving statements was serious and chargeable. They took him out in handcuffs, still talking, still spinning it, right up to the end. He'd answer for it in court, and in time he did. Dana wasn't arrested that night. She hadn't driven the car or thrown the crutches. Her crime was a different kind, the kind the law doesn't always reach. But she didn't walk away untouched either. I changed my will the next morning, exactly as planned. Every arrangement Craig and Dana had insinuated themselves into, I reversed with my lawyer's help. Thank God, that old instinct had kept them from getting as much of a grip on my finances as they'd hoped, and what little they had, I clawed back. The house stayed mine, free and clear. They were out of my will, my house, my accounts, all of it. Craig faced real charges, and I won't pretend I felt any sorrow watching that happen. That's not revenge. That's consequences finally catching up to a man who believed he was above them. The marriage didn't survive it. Hard to stay married to a man facing charges for trying to kill your own father. Dana reached out months later, wanting to talk, maybe to explain, maybe to apologize, maybe just to find her way back to whatever money was left. I honestly don't know which. I met with her once because she's my daughter, and Eleanor's daughter, and I felt I had to. I listened, and at the end I told her the truth. I forgave her, because carrying that much hatred would only poison whatever years I have left, and I refused to give her that power over me. But I told her forgiving her and trusting her again are two different things, and the door to my life was closing and staying closed. I wished her well and meant it. I haven't seen her since. Samuel Voss saved my life on that mountain, and he didn't vanish back into it. He's become the closest, truest friend I have left in this world. Neither of us had much family left, and we understood each other the way I think only two men who once wore the same uniform can. We have coffee together twice a week, without fail. He still calls me Brennan. I've thought more than once about the fact that of all the roads in all these mountains, on the worst night of my life, the man who came around that curve was the one man on earth who'd spent his whole life believing you never leave anybody behind, and 50 years later proved he still meant every word.